the next stage is the associative phase, which is called the practicing stage. So skills are more consistent and accurate. They've gotten to grips with the skill, and they're trying to practice to improve it and make it more consistent again. Coordinating subroutines. So they may have learned subroutines in the cognitive phase, and they're trying to incorporate that into putting it all together to make a whole skill. So you're developing those motor programs. They'll also be receiving internal feedback. They know roughly what the skill feels like to perform, and they'll be able to feedback to themselves as to whether or not it felt like they were doing it correctly. Also, in the cognitive phase, they might just be learning the basic skill, whereas here, they, like I said, they've got to grips with it, so they're learning the relevance to how they can use that in a sporting context. You want to focus on both knowledge of performance and knowledge of results, because the performance should be slightly more consistent, and they want to start looking at how to obtain their results from this skill.
So the last phase is the autonomous phase. So this is the kind of where experts this is where they live. So it's almost automatic. There's little conscious attention required to carry out the skill. Spare attentional capacity is there for detailed strategy, for example. There's less external feedback, more self-awareness and assessment, so they're judging themselves and their own performances, and very subtle cues are needed.
Now we're going to look at learning curves. So this is how a learner progresses over time. So it's used to assess that process. It's able to visually demonstrate how this takes place. And basically the two things it measures are your level of improvement and your level of consistency. For a learning curve to be successful, it depends on your level of practice, your efficiency in processing information, and the nature and extent of reinforcement and feedback, so basically everything we've talked about so far.
So onto the types of the learning curves. So you have linear, so it's essentially a proportional increase in performance over time, as we can see from the graph.
Negatively accelerated graph is where you have rapid early progression, and eventually you'll slow to a plateau or slower progression, minimal progression.
So positively accelerated, as we can see, it's a slow initial progression with regards to skill level, and it improving exponentially.
Sigma curve is the most realistic of these curves, because there's a slow beginning where you're getting to grips with the skill, and then a steep acceleration as you're practicing it, and eventually when you get to a higher level of skill you start to plateau again. While this is the most realistic curve, if you were to actually plot one, it would be a much more erratic and a much less smooth looking line. Transfer of learning. So basically transfer of learning is where the effect of learning and performance of one skill affects on another skill, and this happens in lots of different ways. Singer defined as learning or performance of one or more sports skills having some influence, either positive or negative, on the learning or performance of other sports skills. So here are the types.
So types transfers. So you have proactive, so it's when a previously learned skill influences the learning of a new skill. Again, we can use the table tennis example where skills may be transferred. Retroactive, the influence of new skills on previously learned skills, so it's kind of like a regression of the skills that have been learnt before because new skills have taken their place. So the technique of the older skills that you've learnt may be affected. Then you have intertask. This is the effect of a skill on a new or different task. And intratask occurs when the relationship between two different types of practice are considered.
And more types of transfer, there's positive and negative, as mentioned at the start. Positive transfer is when the skills that you already have facilitate a faster or more efficient learning of new skills. So this can happen proactively or retroactively. Skills with similar components and similar SR or stimulus responses help induce positive transfer. Negative transfer is when learned skills actually inhibit the learning of other skills, so you almost have to unlearn aspects of it to learn a new skill in some senses. It occurs when stimuli are identical but the response is slightly different. So the picture I've got is Sam Burgess, who's an example of both. He's come from rugby league to rugby union, and in terms of positive transfer, he's very adept at running with the ball and looking for offloads. But negatively, in rugby league, they treat the tackle situation differently. So in his first few appearances, he's been arguably running into contact with the ball too high, because that's what he's used to, and he needs to get used to keeping the ball lower as he goes into contact to initiate a ruck situation, which isn't prevalent in rugby league. And the other types are bilateral, so when skills are transferred from limb to limb. Got a picture of Ronnie O'Sullivan, who is naturally very talented snooker player because he can transfer his cue to his left hand, which not a lot of players can do. So he's got a very high level of bilateral transfer.